Rev up your engines! Today I'm going to talk about why not to put exhaust headers on your car's engine. Now, exhaust headers serve one purpose. They allow the gas that has burned inside your engine to come out the exhaust and then flow through the catalytic converter, through the muffler, and out the back. And on the factory cars, they're called exhaust manifolds, not headers. Because cast iron can take a lot of heat, it's strong, it's not going to break. Plus, they're relatively easy and cheap to manufacture. The exhaust manifold is under this heat shield. It keeps the heat from getting and damaging anything under the hood. And the design of the pipes are for one main thing: to get the exhaust gas to leave as fast as possible so the engine can have as most power as it possibly can and to run most efficiently. Now, when I was a young mechanic, all vehicles were carbureted practically, and if you wanted more power out of a car, you could change the stock to fancy headers, like the ones in the picture behind me, and the fancy headers would flow better, they had better heat characteristics, they could be custom made for each engine to get more horsepower. And since they were simple carbureted engines, all you had to do was rejet the carburetors, put jets that were the right size so the air-fuel mixture would remain perfect. Since you changed how the exhaust flows, you have to change how the air intake comes in to put fuel into the engine. Now, back then, if you had a stock Chevy 350 V8 engine and you put racing headers on them that were tuned correctly, you could get maybe about 16 more horsepower out of that big V8 engine. But you have to realize that most of that horsepower gain was at the really high RPMs. They're made more for racing than street driving. Since the headers aren't made out of cast iron, a lot of times they were stainless steel. Cast iron is thick, stainless steel is thin, so they can have wider openings for the exhaust gas. The cast iron would be restricted down because it's thick, where the stainless steel could be wide open and they'd flow better. So headers in and of themselves don't give your engine extra horsepower. They just allow your engine to get the most horsepower out of its design that it possibly can. Well, modern cars are all fuel injected, and if you put headers on them, you have to do a lot of reprogramming. You'd have to find a mechanic with a 5-gas analyzer and a dynamometer and who's able to reprogram the computer to make it run correctly for the new flow that it has. And in the case of many modern cars, if you're driving them on the street in the United States, the exhaust manifold has the catalytic converter built in. So if you remove the stock and put on these racing headers, you're eliminating the catalytic converter. You're breaking the law. You can't take a catalytic converter off a car. So putting fancy headers on a modern car that you're driving on the street is just not a very smart idea. Now, I know people are going to say, Scotty, oh, the guys that are souping up their cars, they put headers on. But yes, that's generally the last thing they do when they totally modify a car to either race or to get a ton of horsepower out of it, and often in places where they don't even do state emissions testing, so they don't have to worry about having it pass an emission test every year to be on the road. First, they'll rebuild the entire engine to make it stronger, then they'll put either a turbocharger or a supercharge on it, then on top of that, as the finale, they'll stick nice fancy headers on the engine so it flows as well as it possibly can and has the most power that it possibly can. Now, I still see guys trying to do it on street vehicles here in Houston, and then you see them going on the street and they're shifting gears and you can hear the engine backfiring and popping through the exhaust. It's because they just bolted headers on, they didn't change anything else, and the car doesn't run right. It can actually cause the pistons to hold from pre-ignition because they won't run right. And sure, they look cool when they're under the hood. A lot of times they'll have them all polished and shiny, and some of the guys will wrap the headers with heat tape so they retain the heat better, and then they flow out faster for more power, and they'll remove the catalytic converter, sometimes even the muffler, and have a totally free flowing exhaust. They like that giant loud sound, which is fine on a racetrack, but in most places it's highly illegal. They put out too much noise. The decibel level is too high. There's laws for that in most states, so they won't pass inspection because they're too noisy. And since the stock exhaust manifolds have heat shields on them and the fancy ones don't, you stick headers on a modern engine, you can make the engine compartment get way too hot. That'll mess with the electronics and all the wiring of a modern car. And since you're generally driving on the street, these modern engine designs, their stock, are designed for generally stop and go city traffic where they do most of their driving, not going top end 130, 40 miles an hour. So putting headers on any modern engine is a dumb thing to do for something you're driving every day on the street. So now you know why it's a dumb idea to put fancy headers on a modern car that you're going to drive every day. Sure, it's certainly fine if you're building a race car. If you're driving on the street, it's just stupid these days. Because you're not going to gain that much horsepower for the relatively large amount of money you're going to spend putting the headers on and then having the system reprogrammed to accept them correctly. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.